Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and today our guest is Philip Roderick. Hi Philip.
Hello.
And Philip is an Anglican priest and he also works as an educator and he's a percussionist and as an author. We're going to talk about Philip's life, how that has worked out and his work as a priest. So, when we were talking on the phone the other week, you said that your first experience of a spiritual nature was you were 13 years old and you were in Wales. What actually happened then?
Well, my parents had a little caravan in a place called Llantwit Major on the coast of South Wales, and we had been there for a few years, and I was a bit of a loner, I think. I ran cross country, and so anyway, one day while we were in Llantwit Major, my parents had this caravan just inland from the seashore. So I walked out up the cliffs and something made me lie on the very edge of the cliffs, which was probably not very safe, but anyway, I lay on the edge of the cliffs, looking out across the Severn Estuary towards Dorset, I think. And something happened. So here I was on the very edge, and there's something about the edge which then percolates through the rest of the journey, on the very, very edge of the cliffs. Looking out, and I felt, for the first time I can remember, there's something beyond what I'm seeing. There's something through that. There's a beauty behind this beauty. So there was a gorgeous summer's day, but there was something engaging, something bigger than what was just apparent to my eyes. And I remember being quite taken by that. It was one of those, the first of a felt experience of behindness or beyondness or transparency or something.
Yeah, there's something about this thing of being on the edge, isn't there, which takes you beyond the normal. It's something that kids have more than adults a lot of the time, and I know part of the adult things to say to kids, well, you have to be careful. But that thing of going to the edge can just open and take you to something quite special.
And then years later, maybe 15 years later, I'd been attracted by the Celtic Christian tradition and was in Aberystwyth in a lecture on the Celtic saints. And the hairs on the back of my neck went up because the professor of Professor E.G. Bowen, who's written about Celtic traditions, said, you know, what is now called Llantwit Major, which is where I had this experience, was in fact Llanilltyd Fawr, the monastery of St. Illtyd, and it was a big teaching monastery. So I thought the very first intimation of immortality, or whatever it was, or beyondness, came in this context, which was nature was gifting itself for this young lad, seeing beyond, but also, well, maybe the prayers of the monks who had been, in this monastery right in that place. And the sort of slight humour there was because the English, in the days of the English and Welsh, the English couldn't quite pronounce Welsh particularly well, so they would change words. So Llanilltyd Fawr, which means the monastery, or the Llan, the settlement of Illtyd the Great, became Llantwit Major. So my first experience of revelation was at the place of the Great Twit, Llantwit Major. I thought, yes, well, that sort of fits the bill. So it went on from there.
And so, well, how did that affect you at 13 years old? Did it have some kind of, did you think about it afterwards, or just experience that came and went?
No, I think it was a shift, because sometime pretty soon after that I found myself reading, and then it became almost my Bible, a book called Mysticism. It was in the Pelican series, I think, Mysticism by F.C. Happold.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so I think that experience triggered an opening, and then I was hungry to find out what's going on here. And so I found this book by and it became a huge resource for me, looking at the Christian, the Jewish, the Sufi, the Hindu, the Buddhist traditions. And so I became aware as an adolescent, there is a beyondness, there are other dimensions.
Yeah, so it started a hunger in you. You started to look.
It was a confirmation. It was a confirmation, something is going on which is very beautiful and very rich and yeah, lovely. So therefore, hunger or a yearning I need to find out.
Because you'd come from the Methodist tradition, hadn't you? I think your grandfather was a Methodist minister,
Yeah.
and you were brought up within that structure or that teaching.
I was a Sunday school teacher at 14. Goodness knows what I taught the poor children, but anyway.
You were teaching at 14? Wow.
I think so. Yeah, I think I was a junior Sunday school teacher at 14. My father was the superintendent minister. But anyway, and then at somewhere like 17, 18, I thought, I can't do with all this church-going business. I had a love affair with God. I loved God and longed for, but I couldn't do the church piece. So then at that age, then, gave up formal institutional Christianity and went on a search.
And what did God mean to you then? When you say you had a love affair with God, what does that mean?
Well, the word love for a long time had big resonance for me. What is, and so but there was this sense of the bigger or the other or the all, or there was something larger drawing me, and the ordinariness of religion or the institutional church. At that point, I was a sort of eager adolescent and wanted something. I wanted to touch the big. And so the other was both love and mystery, and so those words were, and yes, there was a beyondness and yet a very ordinariness about it, and I was questing, really. I was questing from that young age.
And were you on your own with that quest, or were there other contemporaries that were also interested in and drawn?
Well, we had a good, when I was in university and in the sixth form, we had a good Methodist minister who was pretty thought-provoking and liked thought-provoking the young guys. I had friends of about 2 or 3 people, and we would test him and question and wrestle. But in fact, in terms of, it wasn't until I went to university and was about 1920 that I began to realize, after some experiences, there are others here who think like this. Up until that point, I'd been, from 13 to 18, it was a very private sense. But reading this book helped me realize there are other people out there who are on this mystical path. Yeah. But it was held within this sort of young lad's heart, really.
And did you feel the Methodist Church was okay with you coming out on this quest and looking at different religions and different paths?
Well, I was just doing it.
You were just doing it anyway, yeah. It's almost as if that the strength of it was strong enough and you would just keep following what was there. And I know you also told me that you had a vision of Mary. I don't know if it was at this time, but fairly soon after that, where you saw Mary walking. Do you want to talk about that?
It's tricky to talk about. Talking about any religious experience is a little bit challenging, because one doesn't. The last thing I want to do is to set up events or experiences. But I did have I was on my scooter. I used to drive a little scooter.
Yes.
I was in university in Swansea, questing, and I just had this, as I was driving down up towards, I think, Caswell Bay, saw, I think physically, I'm still trying to work out whether I saw internally or physically with eyes, a woman in blue. I was almost archetypal, but I wasn't a Catholic. I mean, Mary wasn't featuring, this was completely coming in from left field. And I could only think, this is Mary. So I got to where I was living in Caswell Bay, which is just around the corner from the Mumbles and Swansea, and felt so moved by this whole thing that I took off my shoes and socks and walked about 4 miles back towards Mumbles, and then found myself in a little Roman Catholic church, kneeling down in silence, because I thought, something has to happen. This is a profound experience. What do I do? Well, the only thing I could think of doing was literally being shoeless, which later, of course, realizing what Moses was doing when he sensed the burning bush, and he was motivated to take off his shoes because this was holy ground. So I felt as a young lad, as a student, this is this is holy. I don't understand it, but something has been given.
Yeah, but you also had the courage to follow it, didn't you? Because to walk 4 miles barefoot is not a normal response to a situation, but
No.
I guess there was something in you that really was very open.
Yes, and thinking about it, even as we're saying this, I've become really interested in body prayer and how the body is used in praying to earth the transcendent in the immanent and the ordinary. And there was the first body prayer. I hadn't until now connected the taking off of the shoes and walking in a sort of silly way, in a way, because this is crazy. Why would I walk? But that was a body prayer, a physical response, or almost a discipline, not knowing that this is awesome what's happened, and I need to make an appropriate response.
Yeah, and I think it's so important for people when something happens which is out of the normal, which happens to us, all of us sometime, having that initiative, that courage to say, look, something has happened here, I'm not sure what's going on, I'm going to trust what my body or what my mind, whatever, my spirit wants to take me, I'm following this adventure. And that's not always encouraged in society, is it?
No, it's not. And then soon after that, I think it was my 21st birthday in Swansea. I think it was my 21st. And anyway, my friend, because I was a bit of a loner and I was staying now further out on the Gower, my friends had a party for me which lasted 2 or 3 days, which was really excellent of them. Anyway, on the first day of this party arrived this Swedish blonde who had come. I didn't know who she was. She'd come from London. She arrived in the flat in the Mumbles, and I noticed this person, thought, interesting, and she disappeared, as it were. And I asked after about 5 or 10 minutes, well, what happened to Ingrid? And then somebody said, she's gone upstairs to meditate. Now that was really impressive. I thought, oh wow, she's just come all the way from London. She hasn't even come in for a cup of tea, and her meditation practice is so powerful for her. She's now gone to meditate before she even says hello, has a cup of tea. And that was my shift. That was the first, I need to find out about this. If meditation is so important to this Swedish blonde, I've got to find out what's happening here. So that was the beginning of me exploring the Vedic tradition and transcendental meditation and Ramakrishna Vedanta and Zen, but sponsored by her commitment to practice. That was my first real sense of, individually this is so important to her that she's overriding human needs and going in the place of stillness.
Yes. Again, it's having the courage, isn't it, to say, this is my practice, this is important. People might think it's odd, but I'm going to do it because this is what I need in my life now.
Yeah, and the trigger effect for other people then who see that discipline or that commitment is huge. So I was changed by that lady who I've never been in touch with her since, but the gifting that we can give by saying, this is really important. Then others will see, some may laugh, but some may say, that's important. If that's important to her, I want some of that.
Yeah. So you went on to study or do TM for a time. Yeah, so how was that for you?
Well, I was hungry. I was hungry for knowing about God, and that introduced me to the idea of a prayer word or a mantra. It introduced me to a whole tradition I knew nothing about, the Vedic tradition. It connected with the book, Mysticism, and so that led me on a journey. I don't think I ever completely rejected the Christian path, but it was just I was moving in a different trajectory, hungry for sensing who's doing what out there. And so I was led on a delightful path, a quest, until I was by then teaching English in a progressive independent school in Hertfordshire. But then my hunger was so strong for God, I've got to find out about God. And I'm half Celt, half Welsh. And the Celts tend to sort of jump in deep ends. Well, I certainly tend to jump in deep ends. So a year into my teaching, I thought, I need to find God big time. This is not just, I can't do it part-time, this has to be a full-time commitment. Mm-hmm. So I decided to leave teaching and to head off to find God. Although I'd had experiences before, but I needed to do this is a deep end dive.
Right. Yeah.
And so found myself in Scotland, met some hippies, this was in 1970, 71. Found myself in a field heading up the slope and celebrating this freedom. I'd been 3 weeks out of school, I had a little mini moke, a little sort of mini Jeep, was feeling top of the world, went up this hill, and a voice internally came saying, you need spiritual discipline. Now, and I remember calling out loud then to wherever God is, you must be joking, I've only had 3 weeks worth of freedom. Not spiritual discipline yet, please. And then again came the internal voice, you need spiritual discipline. And now the one place I could recall that had spiritual discipline was a Sufi centre in Gloucestershire then, called Bashara. And so I thought, well, if that's true, and if I do need some spiritual discipline, that's where I'm going to go. And then at Bashara, I was really impressed by their chanting of the dhikr and just the love that was there. And they had a festival of all different faiths, with a person from each faith speaking. And a Buddhist spoke, and a Jew spoke, and a Christian spoke, and a Muslim spoke, and a Hindu spoke. And I went back to bed that night in one of the cabins in Bashara and had this vision of the cross coming out of my chest. And I knew I had to follow Christ. Now, this wasn't very cool to do this in 1971 or 72, but I just knew this is the path. So I went to Rashad Field, who is the teacher of the Sufi Centre, and he made a really important intervention then. Instead of saying, because I was a bit feeling slightly embarrassed, I've got to be a Christian, this is not very...
And you were at the Sufi Centre.
I was at the Sufi Centre. I expected him to say, no, stay here, Philip, this is great. But he said, wonderful, Philip, you've found your path. And then he, not only that, you have found your path, he then said, I know this really good Anglican monk who's practicing Tai Chi and Christian body prayer, and so I went to him, and they all waved me off. But that generosity of spirit from Rashad was wonderful, and I've tried to sort of replicate that. But so the lineage from the beginning with the Vedas and the looking at different meditation practices through the Sufis, and then takes me back home to my own tradition, which then becomes illumined.
Mm. So when you say you heard this internal voice, you need to have discipline, more discipline in your life. What form for you was the internal voice taking? People talk about hearing voices, and we think in society today, like, that's not quite right to hear voices. But of course, hearing an inner voice is very important, as you found out.
Mm. So, an interesting one I saw something, as with Mary. I heard something, as with this voice, and then the body sense. So there's these three. So I think there's a true sense in which we have inner ears and inner eyes and inner body knowing, actually, and they can be vehicles where the divine locates us. So we have auditory, external ears, but I think there is truly an inner hearing. So then one, of course, has to discern the spirit. Am I going nuts here? Is that a genuine voice? What's the authentic? But there was no doubt that this was so contrary to what I was wanting. I was wanting more freedom in Scotland, to have a bit of a... On the other hand, at a deep level, I was searching for God. So when a God voice, as it were, gives you an instruction, that I actually was thinking, discipline? I want freedom.
Yeah.
But of course that was the call into a discipline which allows freedom to happen.
But when you say, I'm trying to get more sort of tangible, which may not be possible, but when you say inner voice, is that a strong inner feeling, or do you actually hear a voice inside?
well, you need spiritual discipline. It wasn't audible, so it wasn't an external audibility, but there were clear words said. I don't know, it's...
You just knew.
It's
that's
a really
the important
subtle
thing.
hearing. There's a subtle hearing going on. There's a sort of inner audibility, but not an external audibility.
Yeah. I know in my life, when I've changed my direction several times in life, and it's just such a strong feeling, and afterwards, of course, comes in the mind, and all the reasons where you can't do that, are you sure? And the mind plays a doubting game, and it's a question of staying with that and just seeing what happens. And sometimes that feeling dissipates, and I let it go. Other times it's still hanging around and nagging, and usually the interesting thing is that I found in my life that all the big decisions, I haven't made them, they've made themselves. You know, somehow you know, and it's not like I have come to a decision, it's just, it's obvious, that is the thing to do, and there's resistance, and there's obviously pros as well as cons, but there's stuff going on, but it's this feeling, and I think we all have that, and the difficulty is in life today, life is so busy, and there's so many things going on, and so many distractions, that it's got for many people harder to really honour the inner feeling, inner voice, follow the dream, whatever is the image, honour that and stay with it and really see if it's something that is tangible for them to follow, is their path.
It needs spaciousness. And our culture is actually taking away spaciousness. So we've got to work hard at... Well, most of what we're talking about is countercultural. We have to create space for the train to arrive on the platform, as it were.
Yes.
Because if it's blocked by the train of the, I've got this experience which is indubitable, but it requires a certain spaciousness. And I think I'm a recovering hyperactivist. My wife will say, recovering, not sure about that. So I mean, I know what it's like to be compacted with things to do. So working out a discipline that gives spaciousness and stillness, and therefore, well, things that are deep, that's really challenging.
So talk more about that on a practical level, what people can do to help support spaciousness in their life. Again,
well, I use the body for me is really important, and so the way of Christ is, as are other ways, but the way of Christ is particularly incarnational body stuff. So it's really earthed. Now the Christians lost it to a large extent, as from in the early centuries. But for me, real ways are either walking in nature, slow walking, doing simple body prayer, and that helps me counterculture. You know, when you're doing a body prayer or a slow walk, and of course many traditions have these body prayers and slow walk, then the brain has to renegotiate. It can't, the conceptual sort of whirring has to pull, oh, there's something else going on here, I can't just run away. So it's our brains that run so fast.
Yes.
And for me, the body, and sometimes music, because I'm a percussionist, that can be a way of centering down and stilling down, so that the stillness that follows has, literally is embodied. So I can, if I choose to, do a body prayer, do a slow walk, walking in nature, that's my brain being encouraged, just park yourself for a moment. There's another part of, it's a bit like the tip of the iceberg. The brain is but one bit of the iceberg, and the whole rest of the whole person can be introduced either by seeing something beautiful, flowers, or river, or hearing something beautiful, and kinesthetically, if my kinesthetics are felt, if there's a felt sense, I'm going to slow down, just slow gesture, just like even that, for me is a real aid to, remembering. So there's a key word, remember. Remember, because we forget so much. Remember, stop, pause, still.
It's interesting because the Swedish girl, Ingrid, her way to do that was to go and be on her own and meditate.
Yeah.
And that's certainly my ways to meditate. And it's
Yeah.
almost as if your Jesus prayer is a form of meditation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's every tradition has their own individual way of doing this, but it's all the same thing, really.
Yeah. Stilling and breathing. I find breathing really helpful too.
Yes.
Conscious. So, I mean, I think what we're talking about is what has been called the path of conscious love. So the path for me was, love was beckoning, and it's conscious loving. So even on the tube train coming here to this conversation, I was aware I have almost a choice of what to do in this tube train. Do I just stay within my own place and think, oh, I'm hoping to get there and I don't really like tube trains? Or I can look at the people and think, golly, there were 3 women putting on their morning makeup and somebody was listening to an iPlayer, and so I can just objectively look at them and without any feeling. Or I can sense there is a true interconnectedness between me and these people on the train and that's a conscious sense of, well, is there love here? Is there interconnectedness here? And I think that's just an invitation to conscious being, which and it's totally ordinary. It's in this studio. It's as one goes out, and one can refuse the invitation. One can just functionalize the tube train. Yeah, these are just people, and I'm going from A to B, and the sooner I get out of here, the better. Or can I, in a way, bless these people and be blessed by them? So there's something around the concept of blessing too, which is important.
Yeah, in my language, I would call that more meeting. In your language, it's blessing, and somehow for me, it's meeting. And if I'm sitting in the tube, which I don't do that often, but I did actually do yesterday, you sit in the tube, and then if you're really there, it's quite a fascinating dance going on around you, and that within that dance is a connectiveness. And then the separation gets less, because looking at people, you get to know them more, you get a feel from them, you get this understanding somehow without knowing anything about them. I know there was a time again when I think you were in was it a Russian Orthodox hermitage in Devon? I have to read it because it's strange. A Russian Orthodox hermitage, and you were longing to be a hermit then. So the quiet life was drawing you then, wasn't it?
Very strongly. So soon after, Rashad told me about this monk, this Christian monk, and I stayed in his community for a few weeks, and then read about the Jesus prayer, which is said by the monks of Mandathos and the whole Eastern Christian tradition. And I was totally intrigued by the Eastern Christian Church. So I thought, okay, I need to find out about this. Because there's the Western Church and the Eastern Church, and they're the same path, but they have completely different perspectives on many things. So I was intrigued by the Jesus prayer, and then mentioned this to an Anglican monk who was visiting our little anchor hold. And he said, well, there's this Welsh priest who lives in Devon in a hermitage, and they do the Jesus prayer. And so I was intrigued, so I phoned up this Welsh priest and beetled down there in my mini moke and went into this old farmhouse where he and 2 other monks were, and they'd converted a pigsty into a little chapel, as an Orthodox chapel with icons and candles, and the place was really dark, and I heard from outside this chanting, and it was Russian Orthodox chanting. But of course it's very similar to Welsh hymnody, Welsh harmonics. And as I opened the door and stepped into this little pigsty become chapel, and this harmonics and the dark and the light and the candles, I thought, wow, this is heaven. And the Eastern Christian tradition has this idea that when you worship, when you come together collectively to connect with the divine, heaven, as it were, dips down and encloses the worshippers. And there's some sort of real symbiosis between the 2 worlds of heaven and earth. And so I thought, I need to be here. So I stayed for a year. It was a really rich, difficult, challenging year. And we moved to a hermitage in Wales. But I longed for solitude. longed to be a hermit, and the abbot said, you haven't been formed enough yet. To go really into solitude, you need to be formed in community, otherwise you can go mad, or, you know. So with great reluctance, anyway, we did move to a hermitage so there were 3 hermits in mid-Wales. And there I had various experiences that, in fact, convinced me after the year, strong year in, that I needed to be out back into the world. And the voice again had said to love and to heal. Now the call to solitude is in fact paradoxically the call to love, but it's at a hidden level. So I'm fascinated by hiddenness and engagement. So ever since that experience of the monastery and the hermitage, there's somehow a paradox between being hidden and being engaged in loving and healing.
Okay, I'm just thinking about that. So you see it as a paradox. So hidden means to you to be quiet, separate, away from life. Is that right? And
away in one sense. The hermit. What I learned about hermits. I was once the only layperson invited to a conference of hermits, which is slightly.
Conference of hermits, that would be interesting, actually, yeah.
There's only ever been one. This is a Christian hermits. It was in 1975 in St David's in Pembrokeshire, and I was invited. And here was this robust bunch of hermits, men and women from different parts of Europe, who were laughing like crazy and just really integrated persons. They'd integrated their sexuality with their spirituality, and I was deeply impressed by this bunch. All hermits celebrating solitude and communion. And I realized then, it's not just hiding from life, it's actually keeping an external physical solitude and hiddenness, whilst deep down there's a profound connectedness through prayer and being with all.
Yeah. Because so many people actually, in a negative way, are hermits and they're very involved in life, because somehow they're involved with life, but there's limitations of their involvement, and it's kind of this running around that we, all of us know at times, getting caught up here and getting on with life, and actually that's very lonely for a lot of people.
Well, they're more recluses. The reclusive person is that the hermit is the one who's been formed within community and chosen and been considered to be mature enough to be hidden but connected, and the recluse is someone who's just is lonely and may hate the world. And so there's the call. I think I still have a hermit heart, even though I'm married with 2 children, and there's an eremitical piece of me which still loves silence. So silence is like a wine, a beautiful wine, or beautiful fresh air. There's stillness, and I get some of it, but especially when we're in a place in the countryside. Sensing that quality of silence is profoundly spiritually nurturing. And my sadness about our culture is we're decimating silence. So any practice that honours and validates stillness and silence is deeply countercultural, but profoundly necessary for the health of our culture, I think.
So you became an Anglican priest, and Jesus was then your teacher. And I wrote down from our phone conversation that the Jesus identity statement of I am was very profound for you. Tell me more about that, what that means to you, I am.
So in John's Gospel, Jesus uses a number of I am the vine, I am the way. So and in the Old Testament, the First Testament, I am that I am, says God. So there's something about the beingness of things. And Jesus took this bold step of saying, I am the way, I am the vine. But then, I am the light. But then he was equally bold, if not even bolder, by saying to his followers, you are the light of the world. Now, I'm grappling with that because it seems that, and again going back to the Eastern Church has this idea of deification or divinization. We are all partakers of the divine nature, as it says in the 2 Peter 1:4, the second letter of Peter. We're partakers of the divine nature. So Jesus is saying, It's not just I want to be worshipped on a pedestal because I am the light of the world, but you are the light of the world. So he's immediately, as the teacher, shifting to the person, the follower, the disciple, in all their frailty, and saying, be the light. Don't just look at the light and worship the light. I'm only the light because I'm now empowering you to be light. I'm the salt, you be salt. So I just think, this is fantastic. This is what I would call a contemplative pedagogy. Learning contemplatively and realizing each of us is called to be one with God in a way that is beyond our normal thinking. And it's so profound and prophetic and bold. No wonder he was killed, Jesus. It was too radical, too radical. And I've barely touched the hem of the garment of this. So my commitment then, having found my path, whilst having huge respect for other paths, is I know I've got to take myself deeply into this path and allow the water in the well to be revealed, so that we all can sense, what does it mean that I, with not my ego I, but my deep I, links with the deep I of the one, and there is no two but only one.
That's right. There is only one. So when I say that, and you feel that, how is that for you? There is only one.
Well, that's what it is.
Because I can feel that now in the sort of energy thing here. There's just one.
And all you can do is just, woo, yes, and sense it and be it. And then we go back into two. But it's the two-ness then, or the threeness, or the multiplicity, has the oneness as its core. Teilhard de Chardin, the wonderful Jesuit priest, had a great phrase which for me is so helpful. Unity differentiates. So in this practice of one, or the being of one, it doesn't take away your personality, my personality, the flowers, the table. It allows difference, but there's a deep quality. And all we could do is be quiet at that point, wasn't there?
That's certainly where I'm drawn when I have that feeling, is to be quiet and to feel, but it's still life. It's not, and I think this is interesting, the thing of hermits has always intrigued me personally, and we had the previous interview today, my wife Renata was interviewing someone that was in a career in a monastery for 10 years, living a very, very quiet life. And the challenge was very much for her coming back in the world and then seeing how that was. And it's just, yes, can we be quiet and be at one, whatever that means to us, and still be in the world? Because in a way, it's comparatively easy to do it on your own.
And I think that's where there is a path and there is a practice. And I think there is a practice, and we get terribly lazy, but there is a practice of conscious wanting, a reminding. I mean, the biblical tradition has forgetting. The prophets, say in the Jewish tradition, you forget the people you forget. Remember. So remember, and that's again body prayer, the remembering, my body needs to be recalled. Well, of course we're one, but we slide into two quickly. So whatever the practice is, whether it's breathing or dancing or music or sitting or loving or eating, finding ways of reminding each other. And that's where accompaniment comes in, even just in this little interview. And there was a sense of accompanying one to the place of quiet loveliness in one. Well, we can do that far more than we think, I think, to each other.
And one of the things that you have helped to create is something called the Quiet Garden Movement. So tell us more about that.
Well, it's just celebrating its 20th anniversary.
Right.
We have 300 quiet gardens in different parts of the world. And in 1992, I'd been on a 3-month sabbatical visiting spirituality centres in India and America. Came back and sat in the church house where my wife and I were in High Wycombe. Sat in our little garden, sunny day in May, 92, literally 20 years ago. And a penny dropped because I realized Jesus, who is my teacher, not only preached and taught and healed and was dealing with big crowds and small groups of people, he withdrew regularly and consistently to a place of beauty. Well, I'm supposed to be a teacher of this path. What am I doing? He's modeling withdrawal as well as engagement. And he's modeling going out of the city and out of the village into a place of beauty. I need to. So I was invited to do something in response. And so I thought, well, a garden is actually, there are many people who can't go to a lakeside as he did, or a mountainside as he did, but a garden is a microcosm of the whole universe. A small garden or a large garden is a mini version of the great garden. And when I was 14, I had written a poem. I remember going down one day to my dad and I said, "Dad, I know what I've got to be." And he said, "What, Philip?" I said, "A poet." And he said, "Well, have you written any poetry?" "No, I haven't." "Well, maybe start." So I wrote a poem, and my mother, who wasn't strong on affirmation, heard one of these poems, and one particular line was "a falling flower in the quiet garden." This is when I was 14. And she had said about that line, "What a beautiful line of poetry." Now, I wasn't used to receiving affirmatives from her, so that stuck in. And so all these years later, having named this vision, quiet garden, let's call it yes, I wrote that poem years ago, and that line, "a falling flower in the quiet garden," so that's what we need. So I thought, well, we need someone to lend us a garden. So I shared the vision with some of my students. I think we need to provide somewhere between a local church or a temple and a retreat center, somewhere locally accessible, low cost. So I shared the vision, and only about 6 weeks later somebody phoned me up, one of my students, saying, "I think you need to meet this lady, Philip. And she's bought this house which is too big for her, it has a wing." And so I went to see this lady, and she lived in Stoke Poges, a stone's throw from the church where Thomas Gray wrote his elegy, written in a country churchyard. And she had bought this house and had persuaded her husband to buy it. It had a wing. And so she had a wing and I had a prayer, and the whole thing sort of happened. And she said, "Yes, have a quiet garden here once a month." Or once a week, in fact.
So the way it works is that you have 300 quiet gardens now around the world, and people dedicated to the owners of the garden, they dedicate a time once a week or once a month where people can go there and just be quiet, basically.
Yeah, usually if it's in a home, there's some teaching or some framing of the day. It's like a mini retreat day. There's some introduction to a way of praying or a way of being, and then the stillness. People are encouraged to go outside. Sometimes it's neither quiet nor a garden, because sometimes people will bring lunch and they'll be sharing over lunch. There'll be some input, and then there's stillness. And sometimes people said in the early days, "What happens if it rains? You just sit looking holy and getting wet." No, we then go in the house. So the house becomes a place. So the home and the garden become a context for people to be still.
Yeah.
So we get people who are young mums coming, or different people in different conditions. And now we're transposing that vision into organizational settings like schools and hospitals and prisons, thinking, the provision of green space and quietude and honouring that is so important. Golly, let's take this simple vision into settings like schools, hospitals, where a garden is wonderful, and if we're talking in it, that's okay, but a garden and stillness releases fragrance and teaching.
And is it practical in a hospital or a school or a prison? That seems to me, well, prison is especially difficult in the hospital, I would think, but I guess school, they have got area for quietness.
Depends on the place. The first quiet garden in a prison was in Bedford Prison, which was, I went round to meet the governor and the head of training, and they said, this is impossible here, it's a concrete jungle.
Mm.
But in fact, we looked round, and the head of training then said, well, I'll take you round. So I went round the prison with her, and she said, there's nowhere here, it's all concreted. Well, there's one area underneath the hospital wing that could become, and so it did become, a quiet garden. And in we're just in Sheffield, where I live at the moment, raising funds for a quiet garden in the wing of the Jessup Children's Neonatal Unit.
Mm.
So once the idea of stillness and being is seeded in somebody's mind, then things can start happening.
Mm.
It's just a lovely way of saying this is so simple, but let's see if it could work and be applied.
Mm. Yeah, and the quiet garden ultimately is the quiet garden within, isn't it? It's just the being in a certain situation, and it's easier to access.
And there's a pastor in Africa in a big slum in Nairobi, and he came over to see us, and he brought photographs of his quiet garden. He said, I'm a member of the quiet garden movement, and so he showed pictures, and I've done some voluntary work in East Africa. He showed pictures of them building this place, and he said, there is no garden, there is open sewage out here, but once a week, for 2 hours, this little building becomes a quiet garden. We bring in a flower, and other times it's a dispensary and a school, but for 2 hours on a Friday afternoon, and it's still going on. Here is a quiet garden in the slum of Nairobi. And I think, wow, this is amazing.
Mm.
So the commitment is, it's not just in beautiful places, it's in really simple places. And all in a way one needs is a flower or a blade of grass, and that represents this extraordinary place of creation. Because for me, nature has been a great gift.
Mm.
The dialogue between nature and me, and providing a context for nurture, is just amazing.
Mm. I'm just thinking one of the organisations that I try and support is the Prison Phoenix Trust, and they teach yoga and meditation in prisons. And you do hear, and I've met prisoners people have been in prison who, it's amazing what they're able to do, because prisons apparently are very noisy places, but they will often get up at 3 in the morning when it's quieter, and they'll sit and they'll do their meditation for half an hour. So it's as if you can find your quiet garden. You can, inside. Inside. And you just have to, it's about making the commitment. And as you had your message all those years ago, it's about the discipline, isn't it?
And this African pastor, I forgot to say, said, the garden is in the heart.
Yes.
Yeah, it's exactly that.
I'm just looking at my notes because there's something else you do, and I can't find the name. It's a contemplation movement. Tell us about that.
Contemplative fire.
Contemplative fire, right.
Yeah. So, having established the Quiet Garden movement, realizing there were many people who were hungry spiritually, who were drawn to the Jesus tradition, or the Yeshua tradition, who liked the rhythm of life, and having been in a monastery for a while, I realized the value of a rhythm of life. So in about 2004, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, and other bishops said, let's stop lamenting about how few people go to church. Let's encourage people who are creative pioneers, entrepreneurs, imaginative people, to do something creative with this tradition. So they launched a thing called Fresh Expressions of Church. And so that was just at the point I was thinking, there's something else as well as the Quiet Garden movement. There's something for people who are active in the world, who want to live a contemplative dynamic. So was birthed Contemplative Fire, which is living the paradox of the fire of the spirit, the fire of imagination, the fire of compassion, linked in with Christ the contemplative. Because I believe that Christ was a contemplative, profoundly. And out of his contemplative resting in the presence of God came his teaching and preaching and healing. So Contemplative Fire was established as a simple network, a dispersed community of people who were drawn by the path of Yeshua, the way of love, and who think, I'd like to be connected in different parts of the world with people who, also drawn, will keep a simple rhythm of life, which we call travelling light, dwelling deep, and it's partly for those who are in churches and connected to churches but who want something in addition, and partly for those who say, I can't stand the institutional church, I can't do mainstream Christianity, but I want to live a lifestyle which combines the energetic and the reflective.
No, it sounds interesting. And is that something that's growing?
It's growing.
Yeah.
Fragile, vulnerable. I mean, being a pioneer is one heck of a fun ticket. Sometimes very challenging, sometimes. But yes, there are people who are profoundly hungry, wanting to be in the world, in their families, in their places of work, and wanting to draw together the creative and the contemplative.
Yeah, and because really basically all religions at their core and all spiritual movements at their core are just trying to draw us back to discover who we really are.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. And there's all these different ways, and it's so intriguing for me to meet someone like you that has such clear signs to be a Christian. So many people just sort of fall into Christianity because that's the way they were brought up. But with you, okay, you started off in the Methodist Church, you tried other things, explored other avenues, but you got those clear signs that was your path. And I think we all have those. It's just we need to be quiet and contemplate more. And we need to finish in a minute, but I want just you to talk very briefly about this DVD called Sacred Posture, which you, I'll hold it up, which you have available. Just tell us in a minute or two what's on here.
So I used to be a cross-country runner, as I said, so the body has been really important for my spiritual journey. And Christianity is meant to be the faith of the incarnation. So I was doing Tai Chi, and done it for some years. Started with yoga, did Tai Chi, now do Qigong. And an Australian Christian came to, when I was running a church in Amersham in South Bucks, and we used to do Tai Chi in the church, a group of us, and she came and said, well, Philip, I can see you really love movement as a way of expressing faith. How about taking some core texts of the Christian tradition and putting them to choreograph some simple prayer movements? So I was really invited by that and thought, well, okay. So I started with the Lord's Prayer and put that to some movements. And people really loved it and love it. And so then that developed into a whole body prayer ministry, which I combine with chant and movement, gesture, posture, movement, which all the great faith traditions have. But it was undervalued and underplayed in the Christian tradition. So it's a delight, and I find people from 10-year-olds to 95-year-olds saying, this is wonderful. So the Sacred Posture DVD is a way of, it's a teaching DVD with me sharing with a small group some ways of doing simple but powerful movements as a form of prayer.
Okay, great. So, thanks very much to come and visit us on Conscious TV. We're going to have an extra ad on the end of this program for people watching on the internet with you playing your musical instrument that's sitting there, a kind of meditation, so we look forward to that. So thank you again.
Thanks, Ian.
And thank you everyone for watching Conscious TV, and I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.
Hello, I'm Philip Roderick. I'm an Anglican priest and a percussionist. I love sound, and I'd like to introduce you to the hang. And the hang is an extraordinary instrument made in Bern in Switzerland by somebody who's a mystic and a poet and a musician. And it's called a hang, H-A-N-G. And he made it, he was a Caribbean steel drum leader, and sensed the Caribbean steel drum being like this, sensed there's more in the Caribbean steel drum that has to tell its story. So he sat with this drum for a long time, the Caribbean steel drum, and gradually came the idea he would create space inside by putting another side on, so it looks a bit like a wok with a view, or a small spaceship. But in here is empty space, so the space carries all the sounding. And then each of the notes, on a Caribbean steel drum there are about 26, 28 notes, but here there are 8 notes in the Dorian scale and the Greek Dorian scale. And each of these notes is like each of us. There's a pure note that's tuned specifically. And when he makes these Caribbean steel drums, he puts crystals around where the note is being hammered out. And when the note becomes pure, the crystals form themselves into geometric shapes. So he knows, now we have purity. And together, the notes, it's a bit like a community. Together, each of the notes blends together. And here's the drone note, that's a D, so that's the core note, the unifying note. And if we think of our own spiritual journey, it's a bit like that. We need to be finding our note, finding our voice, gathered around the teacher or the center or the one, which gives us life. And also, there's a sense of spaciousness. There's a sense of real, almost what the Greek theology calls, Christian theology sometimes calls kenosis. So there's a self-emptying. So if I empty myself of all my clutter, then, like the drum, the sound can become rich and clear. So I invite you to sit where you are or stand where you are. Be aware of your breathing, gently, naturally, stilly. And just hear the sound and allow yourself to be blessed by the sound. This is like a sonic blessing. Because the maker of this hang says it is like a sound sculpture. There's a sculpturing of sound. So we'll be here with the sound, allowing the sound to wash through you, and ask that your stillness and your quietude will be a place of healing.